Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur Fluent. Comme une fois par mois, j'ai décidé de vous proposer un format interview où je reçois un invité à chaque fois pour vous parler un peu de langues étrangères. Et aujourd'hui, je reçois Joleen qui est dans le monde merveilleux des langues étrangères professionnellement, c'est-à-dire qu'elle est à la fois traductrice, interprète, entrepreneur, professeur. Elle fait tout un tas de choses que je vous invite à découvrir grâce à sa chaîne YouTube, car elle est aussi sur YouTube, donc ça va être une interview cross-platform. Aujourd'hui, elle sera diffusée sur les deux chaînes. Ce sera aussi une interview bilingue, donc on va pouvoir chacune parler notre langue respective et je mettrai évidemment des sous-titres pour vous faciliter la compréhension. Sans plus attendre, je vous présente Joleen. Salut Joleen!
Salut, ça va?
Oui, ça va très bien, je te remercie. Bienvenue sur Fluent.
Merci. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être là.
Eh ben, c'est un plaisir pour moi de te recevoir et j'espère que ce sera un plaisir pour nous tous d'ailleurs, pour ceux qui vont nous regarder aussi.
Oui, pour moi, j'adore tellement les vidéos sur ta chaîne. Donc, oui, c'est...
Alors, on peut y aller? Joleen, c'est bon pour toi?
Definitely. And of course, for those who are going to be viewing this video on my channel, the same thing applies. I will be putting in subtitles for everything that's in French so that you can understand.
Ok, ça va être difficile par contre de ne pas te répondre en anglais.
Oui, c'est ça. Ça m'inquiète, je risque de répondre. I just did it.
Voilà.
I just did it. It's okay. It'll be fine.
Il y a des moments où on va bugger, alors s'il vous plaît, soyez indulgents.
Yes.
Peut-être qu'on le coupera au montage, peut-être pas. Si on trouve ça marrant, peut-être qu'on le gardera.
Yes.
Donc, alors Joleen, moi j'aimerais beaucoup que tu nous parles de ton parcours que je trouve très inspirant parce que, alors avec Joleen, on se connaît depuis un certain nombre d'années. On a été à la fac ensemble. Mais j'ai été un petit peu moins à la fac qu'elle puisque la preuve en est que c'est qu'aujourd'hui j'y suis à nouveau. Donc Joleen, j'aimerais beaucoup que tu nous parles de ton parcours qui est vraiment assez extraordinaire, je trouve.
Extraordinaire. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I will kind of give a bit of a summary. So yes, I'm Joleen. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, in case you were wondering where my accent is from. And I decided at the age of 18 to go and do my university studies, so my tertiary education in France. And I made that decision because although I am a native English speaker and I had quite a bit of exposure to Spanish throughout my childhood because my country is very close to South America and I also have many relatives from Venezuela, I hadn't really had exposure to French outside of secondary school. But I quite enjoyed the language, I was good at it, so I decided to go to study at university in France. That decision was informed partially by the fact that education in France is very cheap. And I say that in comparison to education on my side of the world and particularly education in the US, which is very close to where I'm from, but it's so expensive. And I realized that if I wanted to get a degree, it was useful to do it in France because then I could improve my French and I could also study without bankrupting my parents. So I think later on we'll talk a little bit about the many things that you can do with foreign languages, but right from the start in my sort of path, in my trajectory, knowing French, knowing a foreign language, made it possible for me to get a degree when maybe my parents might not have been able to afford for me to study somewhere else. I was able to go to France because I spoke French. So, yes, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
Non, pas de problème. Alors, Joleen, qu'est-ce que tu as étudié comme matière en France?
So when I got to France, I found myself in a strange situation where I had to study English. So to explain to you, I did a degree that if you are French, you've probably heard of. It's called Fluent. Not Fluent, sorry. So look at what I'm doing. I did LEA. I said
LEA.
Okay. I said Fluent because I've been very involved with Fluent and other things afterwards. But no, I did LEA to begin with. So I started with LEA, which if you're French, you've probably heard of. And it just means langues étrangères appliquées.
Appliquées.
So it means that you go in to a course of study where you learn different ways that you might apply foreign languages that you speak already. I didn't quite understand this when I was going in, and this is one of the tricky parts of going to study in a country that's foreign to you, in a system that you're not familiar with, in a language that's not your mother tongue. So I went to France thinking that I would get to study Spanish, which I already spoke really well, and I thought I'd get great grades, and that I'd get to study German. But when I got to France, I discovered that I had to do English for LEA because it was compulsory. And in France, English is a foreign language. It's my mother tongue, but it's a foreign language. So I had to do it. So I found myself doing this degree that was, apart from my English classes, completely in foreign languages. And it was very difficult to start off with. I won't deny, I used to have to go into classes. I went in with a recorder sometimes to try and record my lecturers. I used to have to borrow notes from my classmates because things I was studying, economics and law in French. And these are things that I would not have studied in English. And it took me a long time. I have to say that at first it was very daunting, but I was able to, with a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, and a lot of help from my French-speaking classmates, I got through it, and I think I'm a lot better off for it. So that's kind of what brought me to France, and I ended up spending 5 years in France in total. I lived in Tours for 3 years where I completed my bachelor's degree in LEA, so applied foreign languages, and then I went to Strasbourg where I began but didn't complete a master's degree. So I got a diploma in Strasbourg and was unable to complete my master's degree, but I did live there for 2 years. And that is where I began studying translation and interpreting. So, and that's a big part of my background as well.
Et du coup, donc toi, tu t'es lancé ensuite dans l'interprétariat et dans la traduction. Comment ça s'est passé? Enfin, comment tu as choisi ensuite ce que tu as fait? Déjà, pardonne-moi, avant même de te poser cette question, est-ce que maintenant tu peux nous détailler aussi un peu ton parcours professionnel? C'est-à-dire au-delà de tes études, qu'est-ce que tu as fait? Qu'est-ce que tu fais aujourd'hui? Parce que tu as plein de talents et multi-casquettes, on va dire. Donc, est-ce que tu peux nous faire un peu un résumé de ce que tu fais aujourd'hui?
Okay, well, of course I can, and I have to tell it like a story because I'm a storyteller, and that's my favorite way to explain anything.
Fais-toi plaisir.
So, to start off with, I discovered at a young age that I loved languages, and my first fell in love with my mother tongue, with English. I loved reading novels, I loved poetry, I just loved the English language, and then I discovered very quickly, because of the proximity of my country to South America, I discovered Spanish. And it occurred to me, wow, there are languages in the world that people can speak, and I might not understand what they're saying. And that sounds like, oh, of course. But when you're 10 and you visit Venezuela and you're surrounded by 8-year-olds who speak Spanish and you don't understand it, you suddenly feel like, this is not okay. I need to understand what these kids are saying. So I loved languages, and as someone who loved languages, I was told throughout my childhood, throughout my student life, what are you going to do with that? You're studying French and Spanish. Why are you doing that? It makes no sense. What are you going to do? Are you going to teach? I heard that question countless times. Are you going to teach? What are you going to do? All you can do with that is teach. And I think I became very determined to prove to everyone that languages were useful and I could do things other than teach. And in Trinidad, one of my best friends growing up was the daughter of the then Cuban ambassador. And one day he asked me to come into a meeting to interpret, a meeting between him and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Wow. I was 18 or 19. And I had never paid attention to interpreters before. I had seen them on Miss Universe, you know? That was my exposure to interpreters. I had no idea what interpreters did, how they did it, or anything. And here was little Joleen sitting in a meeting with the ambassador and this medical advisor and the minister of health and the prime minister of my country. And I'm not ashamed to say, I did a terrible job. I did an awful job. It was embarrassing, it was terrifying. I made mistakes. If you speak Spanish, you know that much like French, there are two forms of the verb you. So you can have a you that is more polite, which is vous, or in Spanish, usted, or you have a more informal one. I completely forgot about things like that in Spanish.
Oh.
I was mixing it up, talking to the Prime Minister. It was a catastrophe. But I left that room thinking there are other things apart from teaching that I can do with that I can do with my foreign languages.
T'en as tiré quelque chose de positif au final.
And the next time somebody asks me to do this, I am going to be the best interpreter that they have ever encountered. I kind of came out of it like, okay, I was taken off guard this time. You're not going to catch me off guard another time. I am going to do this better the next time. And that was the beginning of that. And so it informed my choice to continue my studies in France and to move towards interpreting, which I did when I moved to Strasbourg. So I studied translation and I specialized in interpreting. The school that I went to, unfortunately, at the time was private and wasn't able to continue offering the program when I was ready to complete my master's. So I then had to move to the UK. I moved to London. I got my master's in interpreting in London. And the rest is history. I left London. I went back to my home country, Trinidad and Tobago. And I did a few things that were not interpreting. So you asked me the question about my career. I feel like I'm talking a lot. But I'm sorry.
You're here for that.
So you asked me about my career, and so to get into the meat of that, when I got back to Trinidad, at first I didn't work as an interpreter. I worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. I worked as a protocol and consular officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that is one of the many places where you can go if you are a language learner, if you speak foreign languages. The Foreign Service is definitely an avenue that you can pursue. It wasn't really where I wanted to be, but that was something that I was able to do. I also found myself working as a teacher. And I know I said I didn't want to be a teacher. I can do other things with languages, and I was so determined. And then, much to my surprise and much to my horror, I discovered that I love teaching. I love sharing my passion for languages with other people. So I did some of that, and then eventually I meandered back to interpretation, which was my true love. And that is what I started doing there, and I'm still doing now in Brussels. My biggest client is actually the European Union. So that is what I do with most of my time. I work as an interpreter with the EU, and I also lecture at university here in Belgium.
Eh ben bravo Joleen, c'est un magnifique parcours. Alors Joleen, merci pour ce résumé de ton parcours et de ta carrière. Alors, je sais que tu es un peu modeste, donc tu nous en as pas tellement parlé jusque-là, mais tu es aussi entrepreneur, tu es, comment on dit, en anglais on dit self-employed, mais en français, là, j'ai pas l'équivalent en tête. Bref, tout ça pour dire que…
on peut dire peut-être.
Voilà, tu es indépendante, mais professionnellement indépendante. Donc ça, c'est super intéressant. Tu es donc dans un pays qui n'est pas le tien, tu as réussi à créer ton propre business avec quand même des entités assez prestigieuses. Est-ce que tu veux bien un peu nous expliquer ton train de vie, comment tu marches, comment ça fonctionne?
Well, j'étais sur le point de te répondre en français, but I caught myself. So, in this kind of field, and in many fields where you work with languages, there is a high likelihood of you finding yourself being self-employed. And being self-employed, depending on where you live in the world, that can look like being the CEO of a small business. In some places it's easier than in others. But I kind of always expected that I would be self-employed when I decided to walk this path and become an interpreter. So It means that you have to manage your own time. You decide when you work and when you don't work. That's the advantage of being self-employed. That's the part that most people think about and remember. But it also means that if you don't know how to market yourself, if you don't know how to manage your finances, if you don't know how to manage the legal aspect of what you do, then you can find yourself in a lot of hot water. I was very fortunate when I sort of started my career that I didn't just jump straight into self-employment. I started off with a full-time job, and then I moved to something part-time, and then I fully became self-employed, and there were times when it was very, very difficult. It's a learning experience, and you can make mistakes. And especially if you want to be self-employed in a foreign country, which if you are learning a foreign language, that may be the path that you're thinking of heading down. And it's something that I recommend and encourage you to try. But it is not easy. It requires a lot of different skills. It requires a lot of patience, knowing how to do research, knowing how to liaise with official bodies in different countries. You have to be friends with the Ministry of Finance. You have to be friends with the local embassies or diplomatic missions. You have to know how to promote yourself in different places. And that is not very straightforward, because the way a French person promotes his or herself, it's not even English. I'm not even speaking English anymore. Go ahead. But yes, the way a French person promotes himself is different from the way someone from China promotes himself, or from the way an American promotes himself. And so these are things that you have to learn to navigate as well. Then you have to make sure that everything that you do is legal. You have to deal with different stipulations. I can't, for instance, live in Europe without a visa, and so I had to be able to prove that my business model was viable before I could set up a business here in Belgium. So there are all sorts of formalities that go into it. These are things that I kind of talk about and guide people through a little bit on my channel, because I think it's absolutely worth it. And I wouldn't do it if it weren't. I say all of that, so it's really stressful and there's a lot to navigate, but by the same token, I work maybe 3 days a week. So I feel like I have built a comfortable career for myself where I can support myself without killing myself either, and it allows me time to enjoy the new culture and the new place where I live. So it's absolutely something that I would recommend if you've ever thought of becoming an interpreter. The career is evolving right now. The pandemic has taught us that we need to evolve. We can't always meet with people in person, so meetings are happening on Zoom and whatnot. But it is a wonderful career to pursue if you are interested in it. I don't know if there's anything in particular about my path to get here that you're curious about, Lorraine, but if there's anything, like, I'm happy to share. The problem is going to be shutting me up. It's not getting me to talk.
Moi, il y a quand même une chose que j'aimerais te demander. C'est, effectivement, tu disais qu'il y avait beaucoup d'erreurs, en gros des pots de banane sur lesquels on peut glisser quand on est dans ce type d'activité, parce qu'apparemment, tu as dû quand même gérer pas mal de choses tout seul. Est-ce que tu as eu quand même des gens qui t'ont aidé, qui t'ont montré le chemin, qui t'ont coaché pour faire ça, ou est-ce que tu t'es débrouillée toute seule du début à la fin?
To some extent, there are things that you have to go through on your own. There are things that people can't help you with because nobody knows your individual situation. But I do think it's important to cultivate relationships and to cultivate friendships and to network within your field, because I cannot understate the importance of my friends, colleagues, and my general network in helping me navigate becoming self-employed and making sure that I could build my career in a sustainable way. So from the people who I worked for, right at the beginning of my career, I worked for a gentleman. I wonder if I should say his name. I don't think he would mind, but just to be safe, I won't. But I worked for a gentleman in Trinidad who hired me as an interpreter for the first time. And he knew that I had just come off the back of spending over 5 years living in France. And when he hired me, I said, I am not going to interpret into French. Nope. I will interpret into English. I was very nervous and I didn't want to make a fool of myself. Remember, I had done that before as an interpreter my first time. So I said, I'm not going to do this. And he said, yes, you are. And he hired me for a meeting and he decided that I would do it. And I did. And I couldn't be more grateful because it ended up being crucial in my career that I have the capacity and the experience of working into what is still for me a foreign language. Yes, I did live in France and I've spoken French for decades now. I started learning French at 10, and I am a lot older than that. No. So I think I was 10 or 11 when I started.
Pas tant que ça.
So it was something that I was nervous about, but I had people there pushing me to move past the fear and to dare to do that thing that would be life-changing for me. By the same token, I also had support in other ways, not so much in terms of setting up my business or learning how to be self-employed, but I have to admit that I had a very supportive family. That's very important if you're trying to do something unconventional. And if you are looking to do a lot of things that people want to do, people who learn languages very often want to do unconventional things. They want to travel the world. They may want to have a nomadic type of career. They want to do something that is different from what most people do. And it's so important that you surround yourself in that kind of, if that's your experience, you need to surround yourself with people who will support you and will understand that the skill that you have or the passion that you have is worth something. Because you can find a lot of naysayers who will be like, what are you going to do with that? You know, that doesn't make any sense, and you know, that's not going to make you any money, and you're going to starve. You need to start off by making sure that you are in a space and surrounded by people who will support your dream. And it can be your family, it can be your friends, but you can also find people like that here on the internet. You know, you can find people like that on YouTube, but also in Facebook groups. And this is something that wasn't actually available to me when I started out. Sadly, Facebook only became a thing when I was, I think, finishing my studies in France. That was when Facebook was invented. I just aged myself. I didn't mean to do that. So it wasn't, there weren't as many resources as what you can access today. So if you are just starting your journey today, I really encourage you to grab hold of all of the different forums and all of the different
communities,
types of technology that can help you to make this dream a reality, because it is not unrealistic. It is not silly. And I am living proof of that. I live off of the fact that I speak foreign languages. That's what when I lecture at university, I said that. I lecture in interpreting. And in the past, I have taught foreign languages at university and at high school in many different parts of the world. I taught in France, I taught in the UK, I've, worked at university in Trinidad and Tobago. I taught at the Alliance Française in Trinidad and Tobago, and I lecture at university in Belgium. All of this is based on language. So it's not a crazy, impossible dream, but you have to make sure that you surround yourself with a support network that's going to show you the path. And I had that, but I think it's a lot easier to have it now than it was when I started.
C'est vrai. Je me permets de rebondir sur ce que tu disais, dans le sens où beaucoup de gens, en fait, quelque part, bon, tu as eu du soutien et c'est une très bonne chose. D'un autre côté, tu as aussi beaucoup de gens qui sont persuadés en fait que le fait de parler des langues n'est pas une discipline en soi, c'est-à-dire que c'est un side dish, tu vois, un petit plat sur le côté du plat principal, c'est-à-dire je fais ci et ça, et aussi je parle des langues. Mais on ne considère pas forcément le fait que parler des langues en soi, ça peut être quelque chose qui nous permet de développer une carrière et de faire autre chose que enseigner. Et c'est marrant parce que, comme tu le sais, Joleen, je ne l'ai pas encore vraiment expliqué sur cette chaîne, mais moi je viens du milieu artistique à l'origine et j'ai un métier artistique, je suis intermittente du spectacle jusqu'à nouvel ordre et c'est un domaine où on nous dit aussi, d'une part, tu ne pourras pas faire ça toute ta vie, d'autre part, c'est un peu utopique, c'est un rêve, c'est quelque chose que tu ne pourras pas faire. Et finalement, j'ai l'impression que les métiers artistiques ne sont pas une exception à la matière, c'est-à-dire que dès lors qu'on se lance passionnément dans quelque chose qui nous plaît, on va avoir énormément d'obstacles, du moins dans la perception que les gens ont de ce qu'on veut faire. C'est-à-dire qu'on va très facilement nous décourager de nous lancer dans cette chose-là. Et c'est ça que je trouve assez amusant en fait, c'est-à-dire que les langues, on pourrait croire d'entrée de jeu, parce que tout le monde nous incite à apprendre des langues, on nous dit que les langues c'est très utile, que c'est bankable, qu'aujourd'hui on ne peut pas se passer d'apprendre des langues, on a quand même le CECR en Europe qui veut absolument promouvoir l'apprentissage des langues, on a tout un tas de choses qui nous proposent d'apprendre des langues, sur le CV on sait que c'est important, mais le fait en soi de parler des langues, eh ben, c'est comme si ça servait à rien. Alors, quel est le juste milieu dans tout ça? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait quand on est uniquement dans les langues, et pas uniquement dans le sens réducteur du terme, mais dans le sens, voilà, les personnes qui parlent 5, 6, 7 langues, ou même qui en parlent moins, mais qui les parlent très bien, qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec ça, quoi, finalement?
Well, I have to say that my feeling is the exact opposite of the general consensus that languages are a side dish and you need to have a main course. And the languages only complement the main course. No, your languages can be the main course. Language is communication, and you know how passionate I am about this. And you also know, I've just explained that in pretty much all of the jobs that I do, I get paid to talk. So don't hesitate to cut me off if you need to.
Never.
But but languages are a mode of communication, the most important mode of communication that human beings have. Language is the foundation of everything. It is the way that we transfer knowledge. It's the way that we build relationships. It's the way that we sell products. It's the way that language is the foundation of all of that. So to say that it's just it's the dessert platter, nonsense. No, it is crucial, and in many fields, it may feel like something that is only an accessory, but it can also be the foundation of something. So you may think that, okay, teaching is the easiest avenue that you can pursue. But I would actually say that my field is much more straightforward, because not everyone who can learn a language can teach it. The fact that you love languages doesn't mean that you want to share your passion for languages with other people. It might just mean that, like me as a child, you don't enjoy not understanding a conversation. Somebody who wants to know what people are saying and is curious about other people and wants to know, wants there to be no secrets. That to me sounds like somebody who might also be interested in journalism as a side dish, right? And that person can be a foreign correspondent somewhere for a big press house, because they can travel and they have that affinity for people and for communication that allows them to fit in like a native and get a lot of information that some other journalist might not get. And it's really funny, I've experienced it in my own travels, and I've traveled extensively in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And the minute you try to speak someone's language, you can physically see the change that just overcomes them. I saw it when I visited Italy, and I don't really speak much Italian, but when I started conversations in English, people responded very differently from when I started conversations in my very, very, very shaky Italian. I saw it when I went to South Africa. I don't speak any of the languages of South Africa apart from English, and I thought, well, everyone in South Africa speaks English, which is a very native English speaking way of thinking about the world, I admit. But then I discovered that's not the case, and worse yet, I'm black. A lot of people in South Africa assumed that I was Zulu or Xhosa or something like that. And they came up to me and started speaking to me in a South African language. And then I couldn't understand. So I made it my business, and I think I spent 3 weeks in South Africa. But I made sure to learn a few words, learn how to say hello. And you could see how people respond differently to you when you make an effort to speak to them in their language. Even if you can't do it very well, it is a sign of respect that sort of opens doors for you. And so you can use that as the main course, and then have a nice, like I said, a side dish of journalism, a side dish of national security. Some of the work that I've done as an interpreter has been with people who are in the intelligence field, who are in the military, who are in customs and excise, and they need to interact with victims of trafficking. They need to interact with international criminal syndicates. This is work that I've done. This is not something that I'm making up. I know it can sound like it, but you can find...
Ça reste impressionnant quand même.
Right?
Wow.
What's fun is that, what's fun? Fun but not fun for someone who likes to talk is
Ouais,
I can't tell you anything about it. I can't divulge half of the things that I've seen or heard. But it has been very interesting, and I've found that I have intelligence operatives. I've worked with French military intelligence.
Wow.
I'm not going to say anything more about it than that. And it's crucial to understand language, and language is more than just grammar and conjugation and vocabulary. Language is a vehicle for culture. Language lets you know what is important in other places. It exposes you to what other people are exposed to. It lets you know how other people think, and that can be crucial. It's not a side dish when you're working in intelligence, right? So I feel like there are so many fields that people don't think about. Sorry, say again?
Ouais. Non, je disais, comme on dit, parler, c'est pas faire des phrases, c'est accomplir des actes.
Exactly.
En fait.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have had a very interesting and varied experience myself as an interpreter and a lecturer. You could be a translator. People often think about translation. First of all, a lot of people don't understand the difference between translation and interpreting. A translator works with
Est-ce que tu peux nous l'expliquer rapidement? Est-ce que tu peux nous l'expliquer comme ça pour que...
Of course.
Vas-y.
I wish I could just press pause on the whole world and make everyone listen to just this portion of this video and then move on with their lives, because nobody understands this, and I get called a translator all the time. Although I have done translation, I am an interpreter. A translator works with the written word. A translator doesn't have the pressure of immediacy that we have as interpreters, to understand immediately, give a message quickly, not use a dictionary. That is something that doesn't exist in translation. Translators have a different kind of pressure. They often work with big, bulky texts or documents that can often be very boring depending on the type of translation they do. And I think the worst part of that, the most stressful part of being a translator, is that your work is permanent. The written word is a funny thing. Once it's done and it's out there in the world, you can't take it back. Whereas when I work at a meeting, like I said, of some of the meetings that I have done with different organizations or bodies, what happens in the meeting stays in the meeting. And then I move on with my life. That's not always the case. Sometimes meetings are recorded nowadays. But for the most part, you know, I can kind of remove that stress of knowing that whatever I have put on paper is what is gonna stand. So a translator has a different kind of stress, and it's a requirement for perfection that doesn't exist so much in interpreting. Interpreting allows for, and this is gonna sound silly, it allows for some interpretation. That doesn't mean that we are not focused on accuracy, but it does mean that we have a lot more flexibility with how we render a message than translators have. We also have our additional stress, of course, like I mentioned, immediacy. It has to happen now. You cannot stop the Prime Minister and say, what was that word again? What did that mean? You can't do that. You can't stop the whole meeting like, I, the interpreter, I'm the most important person here and I didn't understand it. No, unfortunately, that's not how it works. So interpreting is different, but translation is the written word, interpreting is out loud.
Interprète, 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 interprète.
And there are a few modes of interpretation. So there is chuchotage, which, yes, even English-speaking interpreters very often call it that. Whispered interpretation, where you are sitting very close to your client. Your client might be one person, or you might have a small group of clients, 3 or 4 people, and they don't understand the main language being spoken at a meeting or a training session or something, so you will whisper, or just say very quietly what is being said for your client. And if they have anything to say, well, then you might say it for everyone else present. Then you have, so chuchotage, whispered interpretation, is a form of interpreting that mixes the 2 main modes of interpretation, which are simultaneous interpretation, and as the name suggests, that just means that the minute the person speaks, you interpret. There is very little delay between what you hear and what you say, so it requires you to be very, very reactive. It requires you to have a very, very good understanding of your language and a very good command of the language that you are speaking, and it requires you to have laser sharp focus. So that's simultaneous interpreting, that's the first mode, and then consecutive interpreting, which happens in Miss Universe. I think I said earlier that my first exposure to interpreting was the Miss Universe pageant, where you would have a contestant from, I don't know, Bolivia or something, and she'd be asked, what would you do if you become Miss Universe? And then an interpreter had to come and say to her in Spanish, ¿Qué haría usted si usted? You know, and so that's my first experience with interpreting, which is consecutive. So the interpretation happens after the speaker has spoken. And that is not necessarily easier. A lot of people assume that is easier. You know, the speaker speaks, you take your little notes, and then you interpret. That must be so much. Actually, no, I personally find simultaneous interpretation to be much easier. You don't have the time to second guess yourself. You don't have the time to forget what was said. You don't have to worry about all of those things. So as long as you have an excellent command of your languages, simultaneous is fine. Consecutive, you always run that risk of forgetting or not being able to reread your notes, and all eyes are on you because the speaker is not speaking anymore. If we take the if we take the Miss Universe example, the question has been asked, it hasn't been answered yet. So the whole audience is now focused on the interpreter. At least all of the people who understand the language that the interpreter speaks. So yeah, I'll take simultaneous over consecutive any day. One thing that I would like to do is that I would like to go into a little bit more depth about the different doors that are opened by being multilingual. I already mentioned that you can do a lot of different things. You can do translation and interpreting, and I sort of gave some of the differences between translation and interpreting and the modes of interpretation and whatnot. I talked a little bit about doing intelligence work and working in national security, but I actually have made a whole list, and I did warn you, I am someone who gets paid to talk, so I would like to go through my list a little bit to sort of outline how useful languages can be professionally, especially in ways that people might not have considered before. So I will start where I started before. I talked about translation and interpreting. I hope so. I hope so. But yeah, so I mentioned translation before. And I actually did say that translation can be stressful. I also said that it can be boring, that you can find yourself with massive books and boring work to do. But that is only one side of translation, and I think a lot of people forget that there's an entirely different side. So if you think about something big, international, fun, and very well known, like the musical Frozen, which I'm sure you've heard of, You'll probably already know that Frozen has been translated into multiple languages. It exists in English, it exists in French, it exists in Spanish, I'm sure. It exists in many other languages. And there will obviously have been a team of translators working not only on the script, but also on the music to translate the songs into different languages. So if you are a translator, it's not necessarily a matter of translating boring documents. You might be translating a movie script for the movie to then be subtitled or dubbed into a different language. You might be doing the subtitling yourself. So it can be a very, very interesting profession and very varied and give a whole lot of scope for creativity. You might be somebody who is hired to do localization of a product or of a service even into a different market, because the fact that you speak another language usually means that you've spent a lot of time not only looking into the language but the culture of the place that speaks that language. And so you can be hired to help people market their product to that audience. And that is very important, because the way that you market the way that you market something to someone from China is different from how you market it to someone from Paris. Different how you market it to someone from Scotland.
Joleen,
It's completely different.
Je me permets d'ajouter qu'effectivement, dans l'apprentissage des langues, on a le domaine linguistique à proprement parler, donc la grammaire, la conjugaison, le vocabulaire, etc. Mais on a aussi évidemment la communication orale et tout ce qui concerne le domaine de la pragmatique. Et enfin, la compétence interculturelle qui nous permet d'appréhender notre culture ainsi que la culture de l'autre de manière harmonieuse. Voilà, c'est juste ce que je voulais ajouter.
Of course, and that is important. I think that it's one of the things that I try to do when I help other people to learn language, is to remember that language is a living thing. It's not just about conjugation. That's a part of it. It's an important part of it, but that's not all that it is. Language is how people express themselves and communicate. It's the foundation of building society. And this is why you have all kinds of language. This is why one of the languages that I've been interested in is even sign language, because it is people communicating complex ideas. And once you have learned how someone else communicates an idea, you have learned a lot about that person and how they think as well. And that is actually a marketable skill.
Excuse-moi, je t'interromps encore. C'est là que j'ajoute,
no, please do.
Vous voulez vous renseigner un petit peu plus sur le fait de comment voir le monde à travers une langue. J'en ai parlé également dans une vidéo précédente, je vous mettrai le lien. Il s'agit de l'hypothèse Sapir-Whorf. Et il y a un film d'ailleurs qui a été tiré de cette hypothèse, plus ou moins, qui s'appelle Premier Contact, que je vous invite aussi à regarder. Voilà, c'était la petite intervention. Vas-y Joleen, excuse-moi, poursuis.
Yeah. Non, mais j'ai jamais vu ce film. J'ai envie de le voir parce que that's absolutely accurate. Listen, language is a lot deeper than what people make it out to be, and mastering it is mastering how you think. It's being able to delve into how other people think. It's being exposed to societies and worlds that you haven't been exposed to before, and some of it might surprise you. You have a tendency to think, I think all human beings have a tendency to think that we all are exactly the same, and what this means to me is what it will mean to anyone else. And so people go to crazy extremes. It's either you believe that everybody's exactly the same, or you believe that differences are much bigger than they are. Language allows you to know. It allows you to know. You're not guessing anymore. What is the difference between me and this person? How does this person think? And how can I convince them of something based on not how I think, but based on how they think? How can I know them? And how can I make sure that they know me? So it's so useful. But I want to go through my list, right? So I have a whole lot of things on the list. I talk about translating in the film industry. We also have the gaming industry. If you play games, video games, they don't just exist in one language. You maybe never thought of it, but now that I've mentioned it, I'm sure it's ringing some kind of bell to you, and you understand that, of course, these things exist in many different languages, and maybe your job is not translating birth certificates and
Tu sais que tu viens
legal
d'éveiller une
documents.
vocation là, ça y est,
Maybe
je veux
your
faire de la
job,
traduction dans le jeu vidéo, c'est mort.
right? So maybe, and so this is one of those places where I say it's not about language being a side dish, because the fact that you love video games, it was never your career path, right? But you might find that when you have, right, when you have a skill in language, you can take something that used to be a hobby and make it something that pays you. And that's an amazing opportunity. There are many other fields. So I have on my list, I have the Foreign Service. I talked a little bit about that. I talked a little bit about working with, people in intelligence. And I've done quite a significant amount of work in that field. Flight attendants, work with foreign languages all of the time. Journalism, this is a place where it can absolutely be your main course. The fact that you understand these people and they trust you. So when they interact with you, they interact with you in a different way from how they interact with people who don't speak their language. That can be that can be the difference between you and a journalist who never gets a story.
Ouais.
So that can be a huge thing. Sales, international sales. I have quite a few friends and acquaintances who work with big companies. Nestle, Procter & Gamble, companies like that you might not have thought of, but they have an international market. They work all over the world. And for them, it's crucial that key members of their team understand these different markets, and they will hire sales managers, marketing managers, because these people have an understanding of the field and are bilingual. And that might be the difference between you and another candidate. The fact that
Exactement.
when they put you in Switzerland, you speak German. When they put you in Panama, you speak Spanish. That might be the reason you are different from a different candidate. Because honestly, there are not that many other things for you to learn, but learning and understanding and knowing a culture is a huge thing to learn. Everybody who goes and studies marketing learns some of the same basic concepts. But how can you market this to someone who is from New Zealand, and how is that marketing going to look different from the marketing to someone who's from Germany? That is definitely one of the things that language gives you, because language is not just about the words. It's about all of the information that comes behind those words. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure and mention. I don't think I've actually gone through everything on my list, but I feel like it might be a bit boring if I did. So I'm going to stop here. Yeah, but I'm going to stop there. There's all sorts of things. Humanitarian work, medicine. You can find yourself dealing with people in from all kinds of walks of life. There's all sorts. Acting. Think about people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jackie Chan, right? Why did they get as big as they got?
True.
Jackie Chan's mother tongue is not English. Jean-Claude Van Damme is not a native English speaker. The reason he got as big as he got is because he was able to market himself to a market that spoke a different language and opened up a whole world of opportunities. So I keep saying I'm going to stop. I'm going to really stop this time.
Non mais ça fait rêver,
Right.
honnêtement, ça fait rêver, et je trouve ça très cool en fait que tu puisses donner, depuis un point de vue en plus de quelqu'un qui a fait une belle carrière, quelqu'un qui est professionnel dans ce métier, donner cet aperçu différent de ce qu'on peut faire avec des langues étrangères. Et honnêtement, aujourd'hui c'est vrai que moi j'ai commencé par une fac d'anglais à l'époque, et on m'a dit en fac d'anglais, honnêtement, à part enseigner, tu pourras rien faire, parce que de toute façon, la traduction, l'interprétariat, c'est destiné aux natifs. Donc voilà, au-delà de prof, tu peux rien faire avec ça. Il s'avère que même en n'ayant pas été jusqu'au bout de mes études d'anglais, et en ayant à côté de ça appris des langues totalement à l'arrache, comme ça a été le cas avec le portugais, je me suis retrouvée parfois dans des conditions professionnelles, c'est-à-dire que avec le portugais, moi j'ai travaillé dans le milieu brésilien du spectacle pendant de nombreuses années, et tout ce qui avait trait au travail m'était dit en portugais, et je répondais en portugais, et il n'y avait aucun espace en fait pour le français, même si on était en France. de la même manière, je me suis retrouvée comme ça un jour dans un boulot d'interprétariat pour une société qui déployait des nouvelles tablettes dans une entreprise de fabrication de chaudières. Voilà, je me suis retrouvée embauchée là-dedans. Donc comme quoi, même si je ne suis pas allée au bout, j'ai déjà pu poser le pied dans tout ce qui est métier à vocation internationale, entre guillemets. Donc j'ose pas imaginer ce que c'est si on pousse un petit peu plus loin au niveau études et qu'on a très 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 envie et qu'on est très déterminé à y arriver. Voilà.
Mais tu as dit que tu as appris à l'arrache. Je voudrais dire quelque chose parce que
Dis-moi.
Il y a beaucoup de gens, comme dit, j'ai beaucoup travaillé dans l'enseignement aussi. Et j'ai eu énormément d'étudiants et de clients qui m'ont dit « Non, je suis trop vieux », non, qui ont raconté toutes sortes de bêtises. Apprendre une langue à l'arrache, c'est quoi? Comment est-ce que tu as appris le français? C'était pas à l'école que tu as appris le français. Tu as appris le français en grandissant, en faisant des fautes, en écoutant, en répétant, en imitant. Comment est-ce que tu as appris le portugais? C'est pas comme ça aussi que tu as appris le portugais?
Exactement de la même manière. J'ai fait la gogole.
Right. À l'arrache, ça veut rien dire.
Il y avait un attrait culturel qui était très fort, c'est vrai. Il y avait un attrait culturel très fort, mais du coup, tu vois, je me suis trouvée à faire le perroquet, répéter même parfois des choses qu'il fallait pas répéter. Parce que je trouvais que la sonorité était marrante et que... Et voilà, et ça s'est fait comme ça en fait.
That is how you learn French as well. That's how I learned English. That's how we all learn our mother tongue.
C'est ça. Et alors pareil, je voudrais juste aussi ajouter un truc qui peut être intéressant pour ce que tu es en train de dire, c'est que moi j'ai appris le français avec une grand-mère bulgare qui était en France depuis 6 mois et qui parlait français avec un accent bulgare à couper au couteau. Il n'empêche que, bon, j'avais quand même mes parents qui étaient à côté, mais que je voyais quand même moins que ma grand-mère. Il n'empêche que jusqu'à la terminale, j'étais toujours première de ma classe en français et que j'ai jamais eu aucun accent en français. Donc, voilà, apprendre une langue, il y a quand même le cerveau qui fait un travail d'écoute, il y a le cerveau qui est toujours, surtout quand on est enfant, ce cerveau qui est toujours en veille, qui écoute tout ce qui se passe et qui intègre aussi des éléments, même si notre référence principale, elle a un accent. Le cerveau, il réalise aussi que la généralité n'est pas ça et qu'on peut quand même avoir un accent totalement, entre guillemets, accent standard parisien, même en ayant une grand-mère bulgare, un accent bulgare très fort. Voilà.
Yeah, and there is no wrong way. For me, that's the fundamental thing. There is no wrong way to learn a language. There is no wrong time to learn a language. If you have it in your head that you're learning it wrong, or you're learning it at the wrong time in your life, erase that from your mind. That is, to me, a huge message that comes out of this.
Et quand bien même,
Lorraine,
je voulais aussi dire un truc, c'est que, quand bien même tu apprends une langue de la mauvaise manière, entre guillemets, en fait, même si tu t'es complètement planté dans ta méthodologie, ce qu'il faut te dire, c'est qu'à un moment donné, quand tu vas peut-être reprendre plus tard cet apprentissage que tu as raté à un instant T, il y aura quand même des choses qui resteront de cet apprentissage. En fait, ce que tu fais dans une langue, même si tu vas moins vite que ce que tu pourrais optimiser, que ce que tu pourrais mieux faire, c'est jamais pour rien. C'est ça qu'il faut se dire en fait. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a toujours des choses qui vont rester dans ta tête, que tu auras mémorisées, même en apprenant de la pire des manières. Et ça tu pourras toujours construire avec ces choses-là. Alors on va conclure. Joleen, je te remercie infiniment d'avoir été avec nous aujourd'hui. C'était vraiment super intéressant d'avoir un point de vue professionnel de quelqu'un qui est dans le milieu des langues professionnellement et qui en plus est entrepreneur, quelqu'un qui fait les choses, une personne qui fait les choses par elle-même. Je trouve ça vraiment très inspirant. Donc je te remercie 1000 fois d'avoir été parmi nous. Et je te souhaite
It's been an absolute pleasure for me, Lorraine. It's been an absolute... If I can just leave with a few quick things that I want to say to your viewers on your channel in particular, who are here to learn languages. Please, you're never too old. You're never too old to learn a new language. Also, please let go of your shame. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how you learn. Also, if you are struggling, please switch it up. Stop doing what you're doing. Learn songs in the language you want to learn. Watch TV in the language. Switch it up as much as you can if you get bored, but don't give up. And last but not least, make sure that you try to simulate immersion or create immersion if you can. So if you can't go, we're in a pandemic. You can't probably go anywhere right now, but if you can simulate immersion and surround yourself with this new language that you want to learn, that will accelerate your learning. Those are my biggest tips. If learning a new language is one of your goals for 2021, I wish you the absolute best of luck. Lorraine, it has been an honor to be on your channel. We have wasted so much time just chatting with each other. Some of it will be edited out, everyone, but we have done a lot of just chatting with each other. It's been excellent. Right, but it's been excellent, and yes, I wish everyone the best. I wish you a new language by 2022.
Et c'est donc la fin de cette interview de Joleen. J'espère qu'elle vous a plu. Pour rappel, je vous ai mis le lien de sa chaîne YouTube dans la description. Et en ce qui concerne cette vidéo, si elle vous a plu, je vous invite bien sûr, comme toujours, à la liker, à la partager, à vous abonner, activer les notifications et à nous suivre sur les réseaux sociaux. Et moi, je vous dis à la semaine prochaine.